Hi, and welcome to the Anti-Waffle podcast with Em and Pixie. And together we'll try to talk about research about any gobbledygook. Each episode we'll be talking to a researcher who will discuss the work they're doing, looking at why this research is important, and asking how did they get into this field. We hope this will be informative and interesting and bring a bit of the academic world into the real world. Today we're chatting to Andrew Cartmel. Andrew Cartmel is a British author and journalist. He was the script editor of Doctor Who. He has also worked as a script editor on other television series, as a magazine editor, as a comics writer, as a film studies lecturer and a novelist. His latest book series is the vinyl detective crime novels, with the next one out in May, and he also writes stage plays. Hi, Andrew.
Hello, Andrew.
Oh, thank you so much for doing this, Andrew.
No, it's a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Do you want to start by telling us a bit about your book series and plays, and then we'll go into about how you do your research for them?
Yeah, well, okay. All my life I wanted to be a writer. In fact, wanted to be a novelist, because when you're a kid, writing is about books, right? Then as I grew older, I became aware of screenwriting and writing for the theater, both of which interest me, writing for comics, graphic novels. But I guess being a novelist was always the thing I wanted to do. And along the way, I worked on a TV show called Doctor Who. I was a script editor, who's sort of like the guy who runs the writing team. And I met a writer called Ben Aronovich, who Em knows, who writes the wonderful Rivers of London series. And so I hired Ben because I recognized his brilliance, and he was sort of one of my top writers. The reason I mentioned Ben at this point is because Ben always swore by research. And this was back, when I say I worked on Doctor Who, this was before Doctor Who was the successes. It was in an earlier century. So this is way back in the day we're talking about. And it was pre-internet. And Ben always was immaculate about research, and I was always very lazy about it, because in those days you'd have to go to a library, get the books, read them. So I was very bad on research, and Ben was always on my case about that, quite rightly, because if you want to write well, you need to do research. We'll get into the whys and wherefores of that, but then cut forward several decades, and Ben is always saying, "Oh, you've completely changed, haven't you, about research?" And the reason for that is simply the internet, because I was never anti-research. I was always anti-hard work, if I may make that distinction. So I love doing research now that the world in some form is at my fingertips. So yeah, research is not only important. I've always been in favor of it if I could do it without too much effort, because I was always aware of how useful it is in terms of creative writing.
I was going to say, it's a very good point about the difference between going to the library and having to get loads of books, and it's the time that it takes. Because of course with the internet, it gives you the snatches of what you need, so you don't have to hunt through the whole book for, that's the paragraph I needed, and the internet kind of does that for you.
So true, Pixie. I mean, that really is. I still think that the experience of going to the library and immersing yourself is unique, and you'll find stuff, because I'm often these days running up against Google searches where there's nothing there, or what I want isn't there, which is unusual, but I'm researching about esoteric areas. So the real physical library is irreplaceable. But for a quick hit of research, the search engines are unbeatable.
How does the research sort of doing it online versus going out into actual situations? Do you ever do that and go out and sort of look at
this is interesting. So the new vinyl detective novel, which is number 6 in the series, is called Attack and Decay. I sent you the cover. So you could say in one sense that involved an immense amount of research, really detailed research, or you could say it involved no research at all, because what happened was I went to Sweden. I went to Sweden for a Doctor Who convention with some friends, and I loved it. And then afterwards, when I was thinking about what to write next for Final Detective, I decided to send them to Sweden. So I'd done the research without knowing I was doing the research. But it was great because I could actually really write based on experience. And it provided not just information, inspiration too, because there was all these things that I just happened upon while I was just wandering around in Sweden, and suddenly they became central pillars of the plot. So this is like places and activities and people. And so sometimes research is like that. You look around at what you've done in your life and think, okay, well, I'm now in a position to write quite convincingly about a small town in Sweden because I've been there. So that was ideal. So, I mean, and I certainly wouldn't rule out doing it the other way around. For instance, I'm looking forward to doing a book about Italy at some point, and I've never been to Italy. So that in that case, the cart will be behind the horse, and I will be going to Italy and doing the research first. So, and knowing that I'm doing research for a book, but that's the sort of area where you can't just use the search engine. Although afterwards, I double-checked stuff, of course, but most importantly, I had a Swedish friend that I'd made while I was over there. She was completely priceless in helping me out with the book. And I had some other people I met on social media who provided other areas of specialist Swedish research where she wasn't strong.
Do you find it difficult to get the balance between, so like when you've done a lot of research and you've got all this information, and to make sure that it doesn't sort of like take over the book and you don't lose sight of the story? I remember I used to read a lot of Dick Francis books. Used to write about horse racing all
Dick
the time.
Francis is great.
And that's his field. And then one time he wrote a book still about horse racing, but it was from a focus of a glass blower. And so then it was so obvious that he'd done all his research into glass blowing and sort of like through. And so he was just like throwing all this information at us about how to blow glass and how to do it. And I was thinking, with the horse racing, he obviously knew all the information already. And so it was very naturally weaved into the story. But I thought, okay, you've done the research, but you don't have to use it all. Calm down. It's like, do you struggle with that? Do you find that
That's a really shrewd question, because so the first problem with research is not doing research. And the reason that research is important, it's not just to get the facts right, although that is very useful and often very valuable. But there's a screenwriting mentor called Robert McKee. He runs screenwriting courses, made a lot of money doing that. And he's said some very incisive things, one of which is the point about research is it stops you writing cliche. So if I was going to write about Sweden just out of my tiny brain, I'd just be coming up with recycled cliches. So research is crucial for avoiding cliches. So the first problem is not doing enough research. The second problem is exactly what Pixie said, doing too much research, or rather, you do loads of research, but then having done all this work, you feel you've got to use it, and it swamps the story, it suffocates the story. So I'm pretty good about avoiding that, because I've got better and better about editing myself, particularly in terms of cutting stuff. Like I've just got the new book, Attack and Decay, has just come back from the publishers with the editor's edits, and they're asking for some cuts. And sometimes I did more cuts than they wanted, because I just thought, oh, well, that can go now. So I'm pretty good about not crowbarring in the research, but that's a totally rookie error, and it's very easy to do. And you've got to be on guard against that, because it will deaden and muffle your story, and utterly the eyes of your readers will glaze over. So it's a matter of knowing what is crucial. I was doing some research about the diplomatic protection unit, who are the cops who look after the politicians. And I'm always the one for painless research. There's a guy, when I go out and do my sort of daily walk, there's a guy who does his daily walk, who lives locally, and he's a territorial support group. He's a cop who does that kind of thing. And so I just said to him, okay, what do they say when they go in to check that a place is clear before the big important politician comes in to say it's safe? Because I just had them saying all clear, because that was my guess. That was my non-research guess. And he says, what they actually say is all stations clear. So that's one word difference, but it makes all the difference. You think, oh, I haven't heard that before. That's not a cliche. I'm kind of convinced this guy knows what he's talking about now. So sometimes it's just like the tiniest little tincture of research is all you need to win people over. And so it's a case of like a spice in a recipe. It's judicious use of research.
In terms of the differences between sort of writing your books and the scripts that you've written, say, for Doctor Who, which are very different and are sort of sci-fi, how do you do the research of things that are those sort of sci-fi areas? Well,
okay, so just to clarify, I didn't actually write any Doctor Who scripts when I was working on the show, because I was very nobly hiring other writers, but I have written Doctor Who since, audio scripts and so on. The thing about science fiction is you've got to know some science. And again, it's to stop you writing cliche, because, for instance, to talk about one of Ben's scripts, he talks about a space vehicle being in geosynchronous orbit, right? And, which is interesting, and it was the correct term. Then, like 20 years later, I saw a Doctor Who show from the new series where somebody had obviously seen Ben's show and used that phrase, and it was all wrong. Like they'd not done any research. They'd just ripped off a line from Ben's because I thought it sounded cool, but it didn't make any sense. So there's things. So if you're writing science fiction, you need to know a little bit about space and about physics, like you don't need a lot, because nothing could be more boring for your audience than the details of physics. But you kind of need to know that you can't just put on the brakes on a spaceship and it stops, right? Because it doesn't. It keeps going. And there's all kinds of things like that. And also I saw a movie where this spaceship was on fire in space. Well, no air in space. So fire is a problematical thing to have, I suppose if you have air escaping from the ship, there could be flames in that column of air. But, those are the sort of areas where you want to do enough research. Number one, so that you don't look like an idiot, like this clown who ripped off Ben's line and just misused it. But also so that you'll discover, often the research will suggest possibilities for your writing that you wouldn't have otherwise. So for science fiction, you'd need to know a bit about, it depends. Is it deep space, in which case you need to know about spaceships? Is it about an alien planet, in which case you need to know a little bit about planetary biology or physics? This is easy for me because I've got a friend who's like a planetary geophysicist from Oxford, so I could just ask her. So in that particular case, but yeah, or you would just do a bit of Googling and pick up some useful terminology.
Oh, I was going to say that, especially with sci-fi, you have to be accurate on the science because of your audience. So like my partner is very into sci-fi and it's sort of like introduced me gradually. But he will, if he's watching something and it's not scientifically correct, he will pull it to pieces and he'll just say, oh, that's rubbish. And no, it couldn't have been this because of that. And, and he knows the laws. And the fact is that most people who are into sci-fi are because they're into science. And so you've got to know the rules. I think you're absolutely right.
Pixie, even if you're not scientifically very well versed, you'll still know something is an enormous cliche and you've seen it a million times before. Or maybe even if it's just plain unconvincing. But so science fiction, but also police procedure, because my buddy Ben, his books are about their fantasy novels, but they're about the division of the Metropolitan Police that deals with the supernatural. So they, in one sense, they're total fantasy because magic doesn't exist. But there's two things to say there. One is that Ben's magic, he's actually worked out how it might work. So for instance, if you cast a magic spell and say, flip a car over, that's an enormous amount of energy. Where does it come from? It just can't come from nothing. So he's got this thing going where there's a portal to another, like an alternate universe where the energy comes through. I mean, you don't need to know a lot, but you need some kind of substructure to what you're writing, so that it's consistent and so that it's not total nonsense. I mean, obviously, you can write totally out there fantasy where it doesn't matter, but that's the sort of, you're telling the sort of narratives where it's sort of carefree. And this isn't like that. So the magic is kind of nailed down and makes sense on a level. But more importantly, the police procedure is totally legit, because when you've got something like fantasy and magic in a police setting, you really want to have, and I found this in Doctor Who too, the science fiction and fantasy works at its best when contrasted with a convincing reality. And when Ben was writing his first novel, he was broke. I mean, he was really broke, and he was working minimum wage in a bookstore and scraping along. And he wanted to write this book about the Metropolitan Police. So he found out, and this is still true now, that if you want to do your research on the police, they're happy to give you a cop to talk to, but you pay. You pay in the same way that if you have a football match and you hire some cops to police it, you pay them by the hour, you pay a cop by the hour. So they said, you can see this cop for like £200 or whatever it was. I said, Ben, £200, because we were both totally broke. And he paid it without blinking. Like he never even crossed his mind that it wasn't worth scraping that money together to get things right. So that's sort of a sign of how important research was to him, how vital it was to his books, and it's paid off, because that's one of the great things about his books is if you read the Rivers of London books and then watch some cop shows on TV, you say, hang on. A detective inspector wouldn't go out and question people because all the lower ranks do that, right? I mean, there's all this stuff I mean, some cop dramas get it right and good for them, but it's the minority. A lot of them are just this. This could never happen. Like they have people interviewing a suspect in the back of a van. That never happens. They go into an interview room. Like there's all this stuff that just could never happen. And even worse than you were saying about critiquing science fiction, if you watch cop dramas and like they behave like that, that totally blows it for me. I just think, well, I'm not watching a real story. I'm just watching Cloud Cuckoo Land.
And also, I think if you work in those industries as well, and then you try and watch something, there's nothing more irritating than going, well, my job doesn't do that. That's not how my job works.
It drives you nuts. But at the same time, if you see somebody getting it right, you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. Kudos to them.
No, exactly. And do you have a preference for sort of writing, sort of sci-fi, or writing about real life?
When I was a kid growing up, I loved science fiction up to about the age of 15. And then I broadened my reading considerably. I read a lot of crime, a lot of what we call mainstream fiction literature, everything, love stories. And these days, I read very little science fiction because I kind of moved on. When I worked on Doctor Who, I got back into science fiction because it was relevant to what I was doing. And I still have my love of science fiction, but mostly I would say these days, if I'm not reading nonfiction or plays, I'd be reading crime or thrillers, I guess, for pleasure. I'm a big fan of Agatha Christie. I think she's a genius, for example. I mean, that's what an obvious statement, but people don't tend to realize how good she is. And a lot of people say, oh, her plots are great, but she can't write. In fact, her dialogue is pretty much spot on, and she can write people from different stratas of society with a really good ear for dialogue. So I think she's a terribly underrated novelist. There are problems with Agatha Christie because of the periods at which she was writing, but that's true, I think, of anybody from another era.
Which one do you think drives which one? Do you think that fiction drives research or research drives fiction? And I don't mean like research into like for your particular book, but like general research. As an example, Back to the Future, and it's like when we reached can't remember what year it was, but 2015, we were saying, well, where's the hoverboards? We were expecting these. What's going on? So which one do you think drives which one?
Well, I think it flows both ways. When you talk about doing research, just living our lives is effectively doing research, because you might stumble onto something in your life and think, as I do, I think, wow, now that's a good idea for a book or a play, or it's a good idea for something and I don't know what it is yet. I think, oh, that's really cool. I was at Doctor Who convention once, and I'm all about the money. So I was in the dealer's room selling my books. I'm at a table with a stack of my books, and I always encourage people to come and stand by my table, because it's a bit like a restaurant. You don't want an empty restaurant. You always want somebody there. So I always just encourage people to hang around and chat. And this guy just started telling me about his medical situation, which was extraordinary. Like, it blew my mind. I thought, well, that is a story. I've got to use that somewhere. And I'm going to use it one day in a play. But that was just a case of something that drifted into my orbit, and I knew that I would use it one day. And so research can definitely shape what you're writing. At the same time, I often think, okay, I need a certain kind of something in this book that I'm writing, or the play that I'm writing. So I've got to find, like, so that I don't know, like, say somebody's being arrested for a particular crime. I don't know what crime it is. I don't know what the sentence they're facing, but I know the kind of hole in my story that has to fill. So I'll do a bit of research and find the right kind of crime and the right kind of sentencing or whatever. So in that case, the writing is driving the research rather than the other way around.
Do you want to tell us a bit about your latest play that you've written?
Oh, yeah, right. So Glacier Lake is a thriller. It's a highly topical thriller. It is opening at the OSO, which is an arts centre in southwest London in Barnes. It is on for 6 days, 7 performances, 6 days. So from May the 3rd to May the 8th are the dates when people can come and see this play. It's matinees at 4:30, evening performances at 8 o'clock. I don't want to tell you too much about it because it'll give the game away, but it's a thriller about topics that I think are really crucial to all of us. It involved 3 actors, 3 really great actors. One of the benefits of lockdown was that a lot of stuff migrated online, obviously. And I used to periodically have play readings at my house, but nobody could do that, obviously, when COVID hit. So we ended up in a cycle of having online play readings once a week. And once word got out, a lot of actors were feeling very frustrated because they couldn't stretch their acting muscles. So people who I'd never met before were being introduced by other actors. And we ended up with basically a repertory company of top actors. So when we came out of lockdown, we were in a really good position because I had a chance to hone my plays and also had a chance to meet these terrific actors. So when I say that we got a great cast, I ain't just blowing smoke. We got a wonderful cast and a very good director, Conrad Blakemore. So Glacier Lake, the post. I think at this stage, since I can't give a detailed account of the script without blowing the surprise, it is a thriller. The best thing for people to do is just look at the poster artwork by the genius Sarah Jane Docker and see if that looks appealing to you. And I think it might. This is why I'm moving to one side. I'm sort of cat management is taking place while I'm talking to you.
Oh, your cat features in your books quite a bit, doesn't it?
Indeed. So there again, that was a case of the research was already done. It's a case of you just plug it in. In fact, when I started writing the vinyl detective books, Ben, who was my mentor because he was already a successful novelist, said, "Are you going to put the cats in?" And I said, "No, I think that's I based a lot of the character, the vinyl detective, on me. And I thought that was just one thing too many." And he said, "No, you must include the cats." And I'm glad he did because the cats are very popular. The new vinyl detective book comes out in May at the same time as the play opening. So I just want you to encourage everybody to, well, I'd say number one, if people are thinking, I might try one of his books or try his play, but not both, try the play, please, because we need to sell the tickets for that. Because if it's successful, they will let us do another one. On the other hand, if you're interested in the books and don't want to shell out money, go to a library. Libraries are a crucial resource which have been disastrously underfunded in the last decade. And please use your library. So if you don't want to buy my book, that's cool with me. You can get it on audio or physically from a library.
Oh, thank you so much for talking to us. It's been brilliant. It's lovely to meet you.
Thank you so much. I will make hot chocolate and it looks like feed a cat now.
It was wonderful meeting you. Lovely chatting.
Really great. Fantastic.
Very interesting.
You guys both take care and hopefully see you both in May, if not before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's done.
Definitely. Thanks, Andrew. Take care.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you to everyone for listening. We'll put up all these links on our Twitter account, which is at Anti-Waffle Pod. And please do get in touch because we'd love to hear from you. And do get in touch if you would like to talk to us about your research. If you'd like to get in contact with us, you can either email us at antiwafflepodcast@gmail.com or via our Twitter account, drop us a DM at Anti-Waffle Pod. Bye.
Bye.